Pleasant day, STEM learners. This is Sir Peter, your statistics and probability teacher. For today's discussion, we will talk about population proportion and sample proportion. So at the end of this video lesson, you should be able to illustrate the concept of proportion. So what is a proportion? Proportions can be obtained from samples or populations. So to facilitate our discussion, we shall use the following symbols. We have small letter n, which means the number of observations in a random sample. P, which talks about the population proportion. And the estimator for the proportion is p hat, which is also what we call the sample proportion. Again, that symbol is read as p hat. And we have the formula for p hat, which is the number of desired outcomes, which is capital X, over the number of sample elements, which is small letter n. So the opposite of p hat is the proportion q hat. So for us to get q hat, we simply use the formula 1 minus p hat. Always remember that capital X is the number of sample elements that possess the desired characteristic, and small letter n is our sample size. So proportion is a fractional expression. So always remember that we will always get a fractional form of a number where the favorable response is in the numerator and the total number of respondents is in the denominator. So the basic operation involved is division. Thus, we can also form, aside from its fractional expression, a decimal value, which can later be expressed as a percentage. So let us recall proportion. So this example is about swimmers. So in an island, there is 72% of the population who can swim. So what does it mean? So in statistics, this is how we interpret. So this means that 72 out of every 100 can swim. So as a fraction, this is expressed as 72 over 100, where 72 is the favorable response, and these are the people who can swim. So the decimal value is equivalent to 72 over 100, or 0.72, which could later be transformed into its percentage form, which is 72%. So that is how we interpret a proportion. Let us explore more about proportion. Given example 1, which talk about parent pressure. So a sample survey asked 2,000 college students whether they think that parents put too much pressure on their children. 840 said that they are pressured by their parents. What is the sample proportion of students surveyed who think that parents put too much pressure on their children? So to solve for that, we have p hat, which represents the proportion of the students who feel pressured by their parents. So that is capital X, which is 840, the favorable response, over small letter n, which is 2,000. Using your calculators, you can divide 840 by 2,000, and you will get the decimal equivalent, which is 0.42. And as I've told you, we can transform 0.42 in its percentage form, so that is 42%. So we also have the sample proportion of those who do not feel pressured by their parents. And that proportion is represented by Q hat, which is the total opposite of its concept. So by subtracting 2,000 by 840, that will be 1,160. And then we will also divide it by the total number of population, which is 2,000. Using your calculators, we would get the decimal equivalent, which is 0.58. And transforming it into its percent form, so that is 58%. So these are now our P hat and Q hat, which represents our population proportions. Let's have the next problem. For example, number 2, it talks about job satisfaction. In a job satisfaction survey in a certain mall, 700 employees were asked if they are satisfied with their jobs. There were 518 who responded with a yes answer. What proportion is this? And what proportion responded with a no? So to answer that question, okay, so again, we represent P hat as the sample proportion of a favorable response, or those who said yes, they are satisfied with their job. So that is capital X, that is 518 divided by the total number of employees, which is 700. And then using your calculators in 2 decimal places, you'll get 0.74, which is also equivalent to 74%. And for our non-favorable response, those who responded no, it means they are not satisfied with their job. So we simply subtract 700 minus 518. So that would be 182 over 700. Again, using your calculators, you have to divide. So the answer will be 0.26. Making it in percentage form, so that is 26%. And lastly, aside from exploring proportion, we should also describe the characteristic of the sampling distribution of P hat as an estimator of the population proportion. So what are the 3 properties? Let's have the first one. The mean of the sampling distribution of P hat is P. In other words, P is an unbiased estimator of P. Okay, so that's P hat. And property letter B, it talks about the standard deviation. So the standard deviation of the sampling distribution of P hat is equal to P times Q over N. So you get the square root of it, or in symbols, we use sigma sub P hat is equal to the square root of P times Q over N, where Q could be obtained by subtracting 1 minus P. And lastly, when N is too large, meaning our sample size is very large, the sampling distribution of P hat is approximately normal. So as a statistician, we always assume that our distribution is normal. So a sample size is considered large if the interval P hat plus or minus 3 sigma sub P hat does not include 0, like P is equal to 0.001, or like it's like P is equal to 0.99. So a very large sample would mean that our distribution or sampling distribution is already normal. So that ends our discussion for the population proportion. In the next video lesson, we will talk about how to test the hypothesis of a population proportion. So this is Sir Peter, your statistics and probability teacher.